All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the Career Accelerator Lecture. We're glad you're here. This is hopefully going to be a fun event. We're very excited to have Flynn Collins with us today. As we get started, if you are in a class that is offering bonus or anything like one of mine, there's the sign-up sheets over here that applies to you. There's pizza in the back. I think everybody saw that. There's drinks in a cooler. The way this is going to work is Flynn Collins, well, I'll introduce him. He'll give his presentation. He may or may not take questions during that. That's entirely up to him, but there will be an opportunity to ask questions. And we want this to be of use to you. The series itself, a few words on the series itself. The Career Accelerator Lecture Series started in the fall of 2020. This is an initiative of the Engineering Advisory Board for the School of Engineering. The Engineering Advisory Board is made up of senior professionals that have a past relationship. Usually they're an alumni of the program, and they have an interest in KU being as good as it can be in producing graduates and helping you get a good start on your career. And they felt like it would be a good idea to have more connections between senior professionals who've gone on from KU and been successful, to come back and share their ideas and their experiences and their thoughts on how you can get off to an accelerated start to your career. And that's how the Career Accelerator Lecture Series began. So the way this is going to work is, well, we kind of said that. Save your questions. We have some prizes for those of you that ask questions. And I'm going to introduce our guest now. Flynn Collins graduated from the University of Kansas in 1998 with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering. He's a Senior Polyethylene Planning Advisor with ExxonMobil Production Solutions. In this role, he leads early-stage business development activities for major capacity growth projects and participates in business strategy development for ExxonMobil's polyethylene business. Flynn has worked in a variety of leadership roles covering manufacturing, chemical sales, and various business planning and development activities over the course of his 25-year career with ExxonMobil. He has extensive experience working and leading international and cross-functional teams. Flynn grew up in Leavenworth, Kansas, and currently resides in the Woodlands, Texas, that's a suburb of Houston, with his wife, Amy. Please welcome Flynn Collins.
Thanks. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak with you today. I'm sure all of you came because of your anticipation of this talk, not the pizza or the sign-in sheet for class credit. But anyway, I appreciate you coming. I know you're all busy, and so I appreciate the time. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to give you a little history of my career, just to expose you to a career path. I think if you've ever heard anyone talk that's got an engineering background, their career paths are all probably very divergent. So I'll show you mine, and then I want to share with you a few things that I've learned over the course of my career that I think may help you as you enter the workforce. Some skills that I think beyond just your engineering acumen and problem-solving skills that can really help kind of differentiate you and maybe stand out from the crowd a little bit when you go out into the workplace. So I will take questions as we go through this. If I have to stand up here and talk for a half an hour, that probably won't go as well as we'd like. So please, if you have questions, just raise your hand as we go, and then certainly afterwards, we'll have time for more questions. Just a quick show of hands before I get started. How many of you are like freshman, sophomore right now? A few, and then junior, senior? Oh, so most of you. How many are seniors? Anybody graduating like in a month? Ready to go to work? Like a lot of you. That's awesome. Okay. So let me start with just what I do today, kind of where I work. So most of you have probably heard of ExxonMobil. The corporate structure is what's shown here. We have three primary business lines in the corporation. So the upstream part of the business, which is exactly what you would think it is, that's the people that go find oil and gas and produce it. Product solutions, any of you familiar with the oil and gas industry, that's typically what's called downstream. So that's people, fuels and chemicals. That's where I work, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then the newest part of the corporation, our new business line, which we call low carbon solutions. So this is I think it's about 2 years old, but a part of the business that's really looking to find opportunities in the low carbon space. So that's everything from carbon capture and sequestration to renewable fuels to lithium extraction for car batteries. So kind of an exciting area for the corporation. And then below that, not to diminish them at all, but the way the company is structured, we functionalize a lot of our support services. So our technology organization, HR, manufacturing, we have combined organizations across the corporation that support those business lines. So as I mentioned, I work in what's called Product Solutions, and I work in the polyethylene business. So polyethylene is plastic. Real simple, these little white pellets, that's polyethylene. So what's it used for? It goes into a variety of applications. And so what's shown here are the applications that ExxonMobil's polyethylene business is primarily used in. So some agricultural applications, so think like greenhouse films, which is a really big application in emerging regions. Some in the building and construction, but the primary applications are really in packaging. So flexible food packaging, industrial packaging. So polyethylene is probably the largest commodity plastic in the world, and those are the primary applications. So what do I do today? I'll walk you through my career history, but let me just kind of tell you what I do today. I'm very fortunate. I have a job that I love. So 25 years with ExxonMobil, and kind of the sum of my experiences has enabled me to be in this position. So Senior Polyethylene Planning Advisor, that doesn't really mean much. It's not very descriptive. So what do I actually do? So I support major capacity expansions. So as we try to grow our business, we have to build new facilities to produce our products. And just to give you an idea of the scale, which is one of the really interesting things about what I do, is just the scale of the business. So a new complex for us to make these products is somewhere on the order of $6 to $10 billion, depending on where we decide to build it, how big it's going to be. So really large scale projects that take 6 to 8 years to develop, from the time that we identify a need to expand our business to when it's actually up and running. So what I do for those projects is kind of the front end business basis. So I put together the justification for why we need to build it. I help justify why the corporation should go spend that $6 to $10 billion to go build a facility. So really interesting front end work, identifying where we're going to sell product. We have to look at, the market for those products, how fast they're growing. Can we actually support the volume that we're going to build? So that's about half of my job. The other parts of my job, I work on business strategy. So for our polyethylene business, we just finished kind of a revamp of our business strategy. So looking out 10 to 15 years in the future, trying to understand market dynamics, what's going to change in the market, and how should we structure our business to take advantage of those opportunities. And then I do a little bit of work on mergers and acquisitions. Unfortunately, we've never actually completed one of those that I've worked on, but it is kind of an interesting exercise. And then I do a lot of work on industry monitoring and competitive intelligence. So looking at what's happening in the markets where we sell our products and what our competitors are doing, and maybe how we should respond. So if you notice the things I talked about there, very little of that is kind of hardcore engineering. So I haven't done an engineering calculation in probably 20 years. And I say that jokingly. I would not be in the position I am today without the degree that I got here, and certainly having that kind of strong engineering background. But it's a good example of how that curriculum and that background really opens opportunities outside of those more traditional engineering roles, if that's what you're interested in doing. ExxonMobil has, as an example, has a lot of very technical roles that are very engineering heavy. I just took a little bit different path. So let me walk you through a little bit of my career path, again, just to give you a sense of kind of the options that are out there and the possibilities. And as I do this, I'll try to hit on a few things that as I look back on my career, kind of moments and experiences that have kind of shaped my view of what makes a successful engineer, what can differentiate you in the workplace. So, but I've kind of laid this out into different functions, different types of jobs, so technology and engineering, manufacturing, more business-related roles, and then commercial roles. I'll kind of show you how I've moved across those throughout my career. So I started straight out of college in Baytown, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston, in a utilities facilities process engineer role. So this was the perfect job for me coming out of school. So I was working on supporting plants, so their power systems, so gas turbines and boilers and water treatment systems. So at the time, this was the perfect job. I loved that. So when I was in school, that was kind of my focus. The mechanics and design part of mechanical engineering was not my favorite. I was really more into kind of the thermodynamics side of the curriculum. I'll get back to that old school laptop in a second, but whoops. So from there, I moved into more of a manufacturing role. So I was assigned to a site in Baytown and kind of did the same thing, except I had responsibility for a unit at one of our manufacturing sites. So the gas turbines, the boilers, water treatment systems, I was the technical contact for those systems. So 24 hours a day, I was providing technical support, optimizing those systems. So I've got the little picture of the pager. Some of you, I don't even know if you know what that is, but that was an old school device, right? That if they needed help in the middle of the night, they would call that number and my pager would go off. So the reason I showed the pager in the laptop, not just to show you how old I am, but also it goes to something I'll talk about in a minute, but it kind of speaks to communication. So when I first started, a lot of the communication that I had to do was face-to-face. We didn't have iPhones, we didn't text. So if you wanted to talk to somebody, you had to go into their office. You could call them on the phone, but generally there was a lot more face-to-face communication. And that's something that's obviously changed over time. Not to say that that's bad in any way, but it has changed the way we communicate. And in my opinion, I think we've lost a little bit of our communication skills. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But as an example today, a contact engineer doesn't have a pager. They have an iPhone, maybe an iPad, and as long as they can connect to Wi-Fi someplace across the globe, they can provide technical support to that plant. Whereas I had to be within an hour of the plant, because if they called, I needed to be able to get back. So that's a positive change, very good change. So I went from manufacturing to a business planning role, which is very similar to what I kind of described earlier, just at a little bit smaller scale. So I was looking more at our regional part of our business and looking at competitive environment, the market environment, and doing some planning. And then I got to move to a couple roles that I never thought that I would do, and certainly didn't think I would enjoy as much as I did, but they were commercial roles. So I started in what's called a product manager job, which was for a very small part of our business, I had profit and loss responsibility. So I was optimizing our production. I was setting prices for what we were going to sell our product at. I had to look at our cost structure to make sure that we were optimizing our profitability. I worked on new product development. It was a really interesting job. And that was the first experience I had meeting with customers. So getting outside of ExxonMobil, which was a brand new experience. So up until that point, everybody I had ever dealt with was an ExxonMobil employee. So it's a much different experience when you have to meet your customers and negotiate a price with them or explain why we had a quality issue and we impacted their operation. And that was very similar to the next job I had. I was a sales manager for our hydrocarbon fluids business, so like solvents. And same thing, I got to interact with a lot of customers who were often in fields very different than oil and gas. So I put some of the logos up there, but very different experience. And again, it comes back to kind of communication, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The other thing that happened during that time for me was, I don't know if anybody knows what that picture is, but that's Mumbai, India. And so about that time in my career, ExxonMobil started or opened an office in Mumbai for back office support. So what does that mean? So what we did is we took activities that were happening in the US and our European offices that were kind of monthly updates of reports or collecting industry information to kind of be shared throughout the group, but things that were repeated very often. And they took that work and they moved it to India. So hired some very talented engineers in India that could do that work. Didn't have to be done in the US or Europe. And so for me, that was the first time I kind of realized the playing field and the competitive field that I was in was not just the US, and it wasn't just the people that I was working with day to day. I was really, kind of personally competing at a global level. There were people in other parts of the world that I had never met that were competing for the work that I was doing. And so it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to, hey, what are the skill sets that I need to have to remain competitive in that kind of an environment? And then the last probably 10 years of my career, I've been in a series of different planning jobs, which kind of, as I mentioned earlier, very similar roles. So a lot of business strategy, project development. For me, really enjoy those roles. So the time horizon is kind of 10 to 15 years in the future. Get to work with a lot of people across our corporation and kind of have this broad perspective. So a couple things in the last 10 years that have kind of been instrumental in the way that I think about my career and again, this kind of skill development. So one is just the emergence of China. So in the course of my career, the little chart there just shows GDP growth for China. The business that I'm in polyethylene is largely, it's a commodity business, it's a global business. And based on that chart, you can imagine that the kind of center of gravity for the global polyethylene business has drastically shifted and it's moved to China. So most of the demand is in China. It's had a huge impact on global supply chains, where suppliers build their plants, the competitiveness of those plants. And so that's been again, kind of an eye-opening experience about how drastically markets and industries can change in a relatively short period of time. And then the other thing, not such a good thing, is COVID and kind of the aftermath of COVID. So in 2020, I had been with the company a little over 20 years. So COVID hits, everybody's impacted. Late in 2020, ExxonMobil announced layoffs of about 14,000 people. At the time, I think we had about 80,000 employees, so a pretty sizable layoff. We had never done that at least in my career. So I'd been there 20-something years. My job security in my head was more about my performance. So as long as I performed well, I never really worried about having a job. This was the first time I actually worried about that and thought, this is a competitive workspace, right? And so again, it kind of prompted me to think a little bit about, hey, what are the skills I need to have to make myself more desirable, whether it's at this company or if something bad happens and I have to go look for another job, what are the things that are gonna help me market myself outside of the role that I have? And so that's kind of what I wanna talk to you guys about, are some things maybe outside of your technical skills, your analytical ability that can help make you more marketable. And also, the way that I kind of think about it is like give you access to, like the VIP room in a club or some space that not everybody can get into unless you have these capabilities or skills. I don't think any of these are going to surprise you, but they're difficult things to kind of become proficient in. So one is just being a really good teammate, the ultimate teammate. And I'll talk more about these and maybe some tips and things you can think about to try to help develop your skills in these areas. I think for me, the toughest one is being a master communicator in many different ways, whether that's verbally, written, presentations. That ability is something that's really difficult to come by, at least in my experience. And then lastly, being more than an engineer. So not just being technically proficient, but having intellectual curiosity outside of whatever your discipline is, and being able to kind of take that experience and that knowledge outside of engineering and apply it in your job. So those three skills I think are important things you can develop and become more competitive in whatever field you choose to go into. But like anything, they're skills that you have to develop over time. It's not taking a class and learning how to do that perfectly and then never having to work on it again. It's something you have to constantly develop. and the skills that you'll need will change over time. So what I tried to do here was just show, if I kind of think about my career in 3 phases, so 0 to 10 years, kind of early phase, across those 3 areas, I was dealing with small teams. So in the jobs I had for the first 10 years of my career, it was very tactical. So I was working at a manufacturing facility. I was worried about the plant running that day. I just had to get through the day, and then I'd worry about tomorrow. So the longest I would probably ever look at would be like a year. So I was working in a lot of peer-to-peer relationships, small teams, and everybody was focused on that kind of tactical nature. I was communicating with those teams and my peers, and maybe like 1 to 2 levels up in the organization. So my boss and my boss's boss. And again, my perspective was just what's right in front of me. As I moved into kind of the middle part of my career, that changed a little bit, right? So the teams I was working on went from very tactical, everybody kind of working in the same building, to more what I would call like a matrix team. So this became people from different functions who had different bosses, maybe completely different reporting lines, now working together as one team. So it brings a lot of functional expertise, but can be a little more complicated because the person leading the team doesn't necessarily have direct authority over everyone on their team. So if someone's not doing what they want, they can't just kind of say, hey, I'll take this out in terms of your pay or your performance assessment, because that person works for someone else. So a little bit different dynamic on that kind of a team. The communication was, again, peer-to-peer, but started to go a little bit higher in the organization. So now I was communicating 2 to 3 levels up from where I was. And my perspective started to get broader. So now I was looking at not just the plant that I had been working in, but now more of a circuit approach, kind of global view of ExxonMobil. And then the last 10 years, much broader perspective. So same kind of matrix teams. Now I'm on global teams. A lot of the communication I do is sometimes external, and now preparing either 2 or 3 levels up in management to talk to our corporate leadership. So a different perspective on communication and kind of trying to get very complicated topics and recommendations to become very concise to get to that level of the organization. And then my perspective is global. So because of the business I work in, it is a global business. I have to think very much in those terms. So hopefully just to try to illustrate that as you go through your career, whatever skills you develop, and in this case, I think these are 3 areas that can really set you apart. What you need to develop will change depending on your position and your experience. And ideally, what you'd want to do is always kind of be thinking ahead. So, if you're in that first part of this kind of a career and you're very tactically focused, but eventually you want to move on to something else, you need to be thinking about, how do I take the skills that I have today in these areas and start working on them so when I get to that job that I want, when I'm 5 years from where I am today, I'm ready for that. I've developed the skills to succeed in that kind of next part of your career. Okay. So let's talk about those 3 areas. So we'll start with being the ultimate teammate. So I stole this. I'm sure there's some NIL trademark or something I'm breaking. I don't think KJ would mind though. So to me, I'm a huge basketball fan. I'm sure many of you are as well. KJ Adams is one of my all-time favorite KU players. Primarily because I just think he's a good teammate. I think he's a good teammate, right? He's always enthusiastic. He plays very hard. I think if you asked all his teammates, they would say, we always want KJ on the floor. We always want to play with him because we know what he's going to do. We know he's going to play hard. And to me, that's what it means to be kind of this ultimate teammate. You want to be dependable. And ideally, what you want from a work perspective is you want people to want you to be on their team. So when a team's getting formed, you want your boss, you want other bosses to say, well, we have to have that person. Doesn't matter if that's your skill set. Oh, they're just a great teammate. We want to put them on this team. That's what you want. You want to be desired in that way. So before we get into some of the kind of skills and techniques that you can use to become a great teammate, let's talk a little bit about teams and what they look like. And again, I'll give you some perspective of kind of what I've seen over the course of my career. So what I've seen is that team structures are constantly changing. So it's very dependent on the field you're in and the company you're in. But kind of on one end of the spectrum, you have this very hierarchical model where you'll have a leader that will basically tell you what to do. So the concept of team is a little loose here. It's very top-down driven. There's not a lot of room for collaboration or personal empowerment. It's just somebody telling you what to do. There are times when that's important, depending on the task you're trying to do. What I would say is most of what I have seen in my own company and then in the industry is people have really started to move away from that model. That's not a very effective model in most circumstances. So what I saw is, okay, well now you have individual teams that are empowered to go do things, but you still have someone kind of telling them what to do. So giving some guidance and saying, now as a team, you guys go off and figure that out, which is better. It does allow a little bit more empowerment, a little bit more creativity, but still it's kind of a top-down approach. So you don't really get the kind of organic problem solving and idea generation that you can get in kind of what this last model is, which is more around leadership providing guidance. Here's the objective we want to achieve. Now as a team, you go off and figure out how to do that. You know, we'll give you boundaries, we'll give you certain parameters you have to meet, but otherwise, we don't want to hear from you until you've figured out how to solve whatever problem it is. The reality is in your career, what you'll find is nothing will probably ever fit one of those models exactly. There'll probably be some hybrid of those. But depending on what kind of team you're in, it will dictate how you want to act on that team. So there are some things I think that you can kind of always do regardless of the team structure. But it's important to know like what team structure you have and what objective you're trying to achieve. So let's talk about some things about being the ultimate teammate. So the first one, this is sometimes really difficult, but you have to have the mindset that team success will translate to individual success. This is very difficult when you're, this is not bad, but selfishly in your career, you're gonna have to think about yourself. What's gonna help you advance, help you meet your goals, whatever they may be, whether that's pay or a certain position, you have to define that. But you need to be aware of how others are perceiving you so that you can achieve the goals you want. And so being part of a team means you need to give up some of your personal identity for the good of the team. What I will tell you is in my career, I've supervised people, I've done personnel development. This is always the way we look at teams. So we look at, did the team succeed and why? And then did everyone on the team, or if anyone on that successful team, we give them credit for that. So you don't just say, hey, the team succeeded, therefore the leader must have been outstanding. There really is a view of like, hey, how did all the team members contribute? And likewise, if the team didn't succeed for whatever reason, it's not that everybody then gets, a black mark by their name that, hey, they did a horrible job. So you really do have to have that mindset that if the team succeeds, that's what's gonna make everyone individually look better. That can be very difficult. This is an area, so having a great attitude, I think particularly for younger employees, this is an area I see a lot of times with younger employees where they don't have a lot of experience naturally. And so they'll get on a team and I think sometimes they can feel intimidated, like they don't know how to contribute to the team because they may not have as much experience as everyone else. One of the biggest things is just having a positive attitude. So, and I know this sounds kind of silly, but like showing up to meetings on time, asking questions. If you don't know, ask questions. People will generally want to help you, though. It's a sign that you're engaged in what's going on. To the extent if this is your personality and it's something you feel comfortable doing, trying to kind of get the group to engage, right? So if everybody's sitting in a meeting room before the meeting starts, be the one that gets people talking, right? Not so everybody's just sitting there waiting for the meeting to start. Those are things that regardless of your experience, you can contribute to that team. Those things get noticed. So be the person that everybody's excited to see when you walk in the room because you're gonna bring some kind of energy and positivity to the team. The opposite of that is also true, right? So attitude is infectious. If you bring a bad attitude, if you're late, if you kind of act like you don't want to be there, that will get noticed probably quicker than if you have a very positive attitude. So it's important to have that kind of positive attitude. You certainly want to demonstrate trust and respect. This is kind of table stakes for any kind of team. But what this really means is, be willing to listen to people. I struggle with this a lot, and I think we all probably do. If you're in some kind of team setting and someone is saying something and your immediate reaction is just like, that's wrong. I don't agree with that. It takes a lot of patience to sit there and just listen to them. But you try to put yourself in their position. If you were saying something and someone disagreed, you wouldn't want them to cut you off. So having that respect, letting people voice their thoughts. And the other thing is, a lot of times what I find, even when I have that first reaction, if I'm patient and I listen, I generally learn something, right? My first reaction is usually not always right. And if I give them the time to explain themselves, they've usually got a good idea. I may not agree with it, but it's usually adding something to the team and to that problem solving. So always demonstrate that. It's kind of the old saying, treat everyone else like you'd want to be treated. So this is another area, being proactive. I think as a younger employee, younger engineer, again, you may not have a lot of experience, as much experience as some of the other folks on the team you're working with, but you can always be proactive. So you can volunteer for things in the team that maybe others don't want to do. That is a way for you to learn, but it also goes back to kind of having that positive attitude. It shows people that you're willing to contribute. And so take those opportunities. This can be, you probably all have this experience. One of my pet peeves is you'll get in a meeting or you'll get in some kind of discussion and you're doing like a joint PowerPoint or something where you're trying, 5 people in a room trying to develop a PowerPoint. That is the most inefficient process I think known to man, because everybody's got a different opinion, and one person gets hung up on, is the punctuation correct? And somebody else is like, I don't care about punctuation, let's just get the words on the page. So one thing I've found is being proactive and, like in that example, working on a PowerPoint or something before you come to the meeting and bringing a draft and saying, hey guys, this is probably wrong. I just thought it would be easier to get something on paper that then we can or on a PowerPoint on a screen, and we can edit it. It's much easier, I always find, to edit something than to kind of try to create it from scratch. That's one way. Again, you don't have to have all the experience in the world, but taking that on yourself, being proactive and kind of bringing that back to the team, hugely valuable. It's efficient, it saves time, and it demonstrates to the team that you're invested in what they're trying to do. And again, you don't necessarily have to have a lot of experience to do that. If you've been a part of the team and you've been listening, you can take a shot at that without a lot of experience. So this one, again, seems kind of obvious, but meet your commitments. If you say you're going to do something, nothing really destroys kind of a team dynamic more than if there's a perception that certain people aren't carrying their weight, right? So make sure that you do what you say you're going to do. And then always try to kind of challenge the status quo. So it's a good idea to challenge groupthink. Again, you don't have to have a lot of experience to do that. If you don't think the group is considering all options, very easy just to say, hey, let's step back, let's consider something else, let's consider a different approach, and kind of test the group to make sure that they're on the right track. So again, I think these are things that are probably obvious to you, but I can tell you in my experience, these things work. It's important to kind of demonstrate these things, and as easy as they may sound, not everybody can do these things well. And so being able to do them and really making a commitment to do them can be a way to kind of differentiate yourself. Okay, master communicator. So I want you to imagine a scenario here. So imagine you're working for whatever company you're in, whatever field you're in, you're working on some big project, and you're just about done. You're 2 weeks away from being done, so you're kind of forming conclusions about what the answer is going to be, what your recommendation is going to be. And you walk out of your office to go home at night, and you notice in the elevator is your boss's boss. And you know that she is really interested in the work that you're doing. So this is someone that you want to impress, and you know that she's going to ask you about the project that you're working on. And so you have this kind of split-second decision you have to make when you see her standing on the elevator like that. One is, am I scared to talk to her about what I'm working on? Because I know I've only got probably 30 seconds to kind of convince her of whatever it is we're going to recommend. And are you confident enough to be able to convey that information in 30 seconds? Or do you say to yourself, I can't explain this in 30 seconds. I'm going to go back into my office and walk away and let the elevator door close because I don't have the confidence to go talk to her about that. It's kind of a made-up situation, but I'll tell you, like, I've had this happen in different situations. And so having that confidence to be able to communicate what you're working on is critically important, not just in terms of the job you're doing, but how you're perceived by the organization. And ultimately, as you want to advance in your career, being able to communicate things concisely, that concept of like an elevator pitch, it sounds kind of cliche, but it's true. People who can do that effectively have a really have a huge advantage over those who can't. So one of the things that challenges this a little bit is in a modern kind of environment, right? We have all sorts of ways to communicate. You can text and email and instant message, and we've got PowerPoint, and now we've got Zoom, and there's like a million ways to connect with people. What I have found, though, is as we've increased the number of methods and modes of communication, it is not more efficient. It's easier to reach people. It is not as effective as what I've found in the past. And I think it's just because it's become so easy, we don't think about it as much in terms of what message are we trying to convey, what information are we trying to communicate. And so one of the things that I find is, particularly with kind of engineering field, is sometimes you can feel like this person standing on the rock and somebody is trying to convey something to you, and it feels like you're standing at the bottom of a waterfall. It is just never-ending information kind of flooding towards you. You're not sure where it starts, where it stops, what the point is. Like, it's very difficult to kind of assess what's going on. When ideally what you want to do when you're communicating is have this concept of like, hey, I just want to give the person what they need. I want to give them just a glass of water. That's all they need. They don't need the whole waterfall. They need this crystal clear glass of water, and I just want to give them that. That's a way to think about it. And so there's a handful of kind of tips and things to think about. So first is before you communicate something, whether it's a presentation or in a workplace, an email that you're sending to someone, really take the time to think about why am I communicating this? What is the objective of what I'm communicating? Am I just trying to inform someone of something? Am I just trying to influence them in a certain direction? Or do I need them to make a decision? So am I trying to give them options and a recommendation? You'll be surprised how many times I'll be in meetings, or I've done this myself, and I realize I'm presenting something without a clear message. I'm not really doing any of these things effectively. So taking the time before you try to communicate something to really think through the objective is hugely important. This next one, I think, is something I struggle with. I think everybody I know struggles with, and that is trying to understand the implications of the work you've done. What does your work really mean? What's the value, and what is it telling you, versus just explaining what you did. And so part of this is just ego. A lot of what you'll work on when you get into your career, it's difficult. It will take you time. You'll have to go through some trial and error. And when you finish that, you have a natural tendency to want to explain that to someone. To, hey, look at all this great stuff I did. Look how difficult it was. And that's important. I'm not diminishing that in any way. But as you communicate that, especially to your boss or your boss's boss, they're going to be less interested in what you did and more what it means. So in their mind, they're going to be thinking, that's what I pay you to do. So the effort you put in, I appreciate it, but that's kind of what I expect you to do. I'm interested in what it means. And so when you communicate that, try to have that in your mind, is less on what you did and more on what it means. So ask yourself, when you write an email or a presentation, if you read it and you kind of say to yourself, like, so what? What does this really mean? You probably haven't done a great job of communicating the key message. And so that's a good way to always kind of ask yourself, just say, so what? Like when you read something, if you can't answer that, or it's not obvious on what you've developed, that's probably something you need to look at. I would also say have a plan before you start, particularly with a presentation. Before you start writing the words on your presentation or putting data into it or whatever it's gonna look like. Like one of the things I try to do is like write a storyboard. So I try to write the last slide. What is it that I'm gonna recommend or ask or whatever it is that I'm trying to communicate, and get really crystal clear in my head that that's what I want the final page and the final discussion to be. So if I can get that straight and then kind of work backwards on what are all the things I need to do to lead up to that conclusion and kind of lay out that storyboard, it becomes much easier to add data and words to that presentation to get you to that end. So have a plan before you start. Another technique, some of you may have heard of this, but bottom line up front. This works really well, like with emails or shorter communications. Just start your email or communication with your conclusion. So kind of flip your email, if you will. Instead of waiting to the end, just say it up front and just say, hey, here's what I'm asking, here's what I'm recommending, and then let me tell you why I'm recommending that. It really helps the reader or the recipient understand where you're going. So they're better able to kind of interpret and understand the logic you're using to get to that conclusion. And then lastly, put yourself in the position of your target audience. So one of the things I try to do is if I'm ever in a meeting where I'm not the primary presenter or kind of recipient of the information, it's a really good opportunity to watch the dynamics in the room. So if someone else is presenting to some kind of manager or something, watch how that goes. Watch the manager's body language, see how the presenter is interacting with them, good or bad, right? It's an opportunity for you to kind of observe without any consequence to you, right? It's a really good way to learn, not just about specific people like your manager, but also just in general. How, if you see a really great presenter, what are the things that they're doing that are really resonating with the audience? So I find that watching other people is a really great way to kind of learn things that work well and things that don't work well. Okay? So lastly, being more than an engineer. So I put this picture of the library. Again, probably shows how old I am. I'm not sure how many of you read a lot of books versus listen to podcasts and things. That's fine. But the concept here is having interest outside of your discipline. Because I think what you'll find when you get into your career is you'll have to have some interest and knowledge outside of that discipline. Nothing is purely a mechanical engineering job and all you need to know are those skills. You'll need to know economics and history of where you're trying to sell product, or if you're in a services business, again, same thing. What's the culture of your client, and understanding those things can be very important. So I wanted to give you an example of something some work we did in our group. We do this every year, but one of the things we have to do is try to put together an outlook for the margins for our polyethylene business. So what do we think the future margins will look like for this product? Usually it's like a 5-year outlook. So we give this assignment to a group that has, the person leading the group is probably 15 years of experience. So pretty seasoned person, wide range of experience. But the person who actually does all the work is probably a 5-year employee. And most of the time that employee has probably come from a manufacturing site. So they've had like no business jobs. This might be their first job where they're kind of looking at the business in a little different way. And so we basically give them this question and say, you have 3 months. We need you to put together a 5-year outlook for polyethylene margins globally. We don't kind of throw them off the deep end, like we help them, but essentially this is what we're asking them to do. So how do you do that? Like, what are the things that you'd have to look for and consider? So I'm not gonna read through all these, you can read them, but there's kind of there's a demand side to that question. So fundamentally, this question comes down to supply and demand. Your margin is gonna be a function of those two things. If supply is very tight, your margins are probably gonna be pretty high because people are gonna be willing to pay a bit more if they can't find supply. And the opposite's true if supply is long. If there's plenty of supply, margins are probably gonna drop because customers have a lot of choices. So there's a whole set of questions around demand that have to be answered. And if you kind of read through those, what does the GDP outlook look like? How do you connect, in our case, polyethylene demand to GDP? On the supply side, how many plants are going to get built? What would affect suppliers building more plants? What do the economics look like on that? What's happening in specific countries that might affect how fast or whether countries build those plants? None of those are engineering questions. None of those are things you're learning in your engineering specific classes, right? Those are macroeconomic questions. Those are marketing questions. Those are policy questions, right? So what is China doing in their 5-year plan that would affect how many facilities they may build? Those are not things that you're going to learn in a classroom. You're going to have to learn outside of that classroom. So that's reading news reports, that's reading newspapers, that's understanding macroeconomics in a way that you can actually apply it to your job. And then on top of that, kind of back to what we just talked about, we ask the person who does this, hey, you're going to have to coordinate with a global team within ExxonMobil and with external resources to develop information to do this. And then you're going to have to go present this upline. So the person who does this is going to end up presenting to kind of somebody who's probably 4 levels above them in the organization. And so I use this just to illustrate the example of part of it, at least in the company I work in and some of the roles you may find yourself in, it's going to be much more than just what you've learned here. What you're learning here prepares you very well for what you're going to go do, but you're going to have to be open to learning new things because you can't learn everything you're ever going to need for a 30-year career in the 4 or 5 years that you spend here. So there's kind of 4 areas that I would encourage you to just to think about as you go forward. It'll depend a little bit on your discipline and industry that you go into, but one would be economics. So some of you may take some economics classes here, which is fantastic. But really everything that an engineer does is going to be based on some kind of cost-benefit type of decision. And so you really do need to understand your company's economics, but kind of broader market economics as well. The value chain that you're in. So if you're making, in our case, we make polyethylene, we need to understand what the end consumer of polyethylene, what motivates them, how much are they willing to pay for products for us to better understand our business. So whatever industry you're in, it's important to understand the entire value chain, what motivates all of the suppliers and the members of that value chain. So I'd certainly encourage you to kind of stay abreast of policy developments, current events, just understanding what's happening in the world as it relates to whatever industry you're in. So for the industry, for polyethylene, the kind of conflict going on in the Middle East right now, the shipping disruptions that have happened in the Red Sea has a massive impact on our business. And so not that we can predict that when that's going to end, but just understanding the potential implications of what's happening there on our business is really important. And then I would say also, understanding history and culture of maybe the markets that you might be interested in, or certainly if you work for a company that's got a global presence and you're working with colleagues from China or India or wherever, taking some time to understand their history and culture. You don't have to become an expert, but it really does help you relate better to them if you know a little bit more about their history and culture. And then the last thing I would say in this kind of being more than an engineer is as you get into the workforce and as you go through your career, you really do need to find your own personal outlet for how you will disconnect and recharge. You guys have a lot of opportunities ahead of you. You should be really excited about the field that you're entering, but it is challenging and it's going to be stressful, and that's fine. But it becomes very important to find a method to kind of disconnect. So when you're not at work, find something that you enjoy doing. It could be many things. It could be one thing that just lets you recharge yourself a little bit. For me, it's reading. I love to read, and that's the way I recharge. So it's one thing to find it, but then the other thing I would tell you is you have to dedicate time to doing it. So it's not enough just to have the thing that you like to do. You have to force yourself to take that time because that stress and anxiety in some of the roles you may be in, it is not good for you over time if you don't find a way to release that stress. You really have to commit yourself to finding that time to kind of recharge. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Hopefully maybe a lot of information. Hopefully a couple of those things stick with you. Happy to answer any questions about what I've covered or my career or whatever questions you may have.
Okay, thanks, Flynn. And I got 2 microphones here. That should be on. Yeah. One is for the room and one is for the recording. So I'm going to hand you 2. That's why I'm handing you 2. Questions right here.
First off, thank you for this. This was amazing. Did you plan on going into more that marketing and management role right when you started working, or did that just kind of come up on you and you just decided to take it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I had, 25 years ago, if you would have shown me this career path, I would have laughed at you, because I was very much, like I said, the first job I had, I loved. It was exactly what I wanted to be doing. And there were paths kind of in that field that were more senior positions that would have been more of a technical kind of route. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. And then as I had opportunities in other areas, I found, not that I didn't enjoy that, but I liked them better. So I went to manufacturing and I thought, I'm not gonna like working at a plant. Those are some of the best jobs that I ever had. And so every step of the way, I kind of found opportunities that I liked a little bit better than what I had done before. So I did sales. I didn't really like it. It was very valuable, but I realized that I'm not gonna be a sales manager. So to me, it's more about keeping your options open. So certainly if you have something you wanna do, pursue it, absolutely. But just keep your options open and recognize if you get down that path and it's not really what you thought it was, that's okay. You still have a lot of opportunities to go do different things. Don't get so locked into something that if it's not really what you want, that you feel like you have to continue doing that. There's a lot of other things you can do.
Thank you.
Questions? A lot of hands up.
I can take it.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking your time out to speak with us. You were talking about how there was a 14,000 employee layoff at Exxon during the COVID-19 pandemic. What kind of mentality do you have to keep up, or how do you go to work every day after that? Because morale gets low, and so how do you and you as a company and your colleagues move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, morale was very low. And it was kind of, COVID in general had a, horrible impact. And then on top of that was this, I think what I've kind of learned over my career, and it took me a while, is that you have to find a company and a job that gives you personal fulfillment. So that's how you have to motivate yourself to get up and go to work the next day, regardless of kind of what's happening, is your commitment to what you're doing and your kind of pride in your own work and your role, your commitment to your colleagues. And you have to have, pride in what you're doing. So I would say if you find yourself in a role or with a company that doesn't resonate with you, if you don't really like what you're doing or you disagree with what that company is doing or stands for, you need to find something different to do, because that really is the only way that you can kind of get out of bed the next morning and go to work in difficult situations, is that you're finding that kind of personal fulfillment in what your job is.
You talked a lot about communication, and I think something you said in particular was communication has gotten easier, but it hasn't necessarily gotten better, I think it was. When you seeing the growth of technology used in businesses, what would you say is one of the pitfalls people fall into when it comes to adapting new technologies?
I think, and I'll give you an example to kind of illustrate. I think there is a perception that there's so much information available now and it's so easily accessible. I think the trap that, and when I say this, I fall into this too, so please don't, I'm not saying that I'm perfect at this. It becomes easy to share without doing any kind of analysis or thought about what you're sharing. So for example, in the group I work in, we have an instant message group. And so what we try to do is if we find interesting news articles about our business or industry, we'll post some comment or something. And what I find is a lot of time people, because it's easy, they go grab a web link and they just paste it into the chat and say, hey, interesting article. And that's great, but like they took the time to read it to figure out that it was interesting. And then they paste the link and now there's 10 of us on the chat. Now we have to all go read it, right? What would be better is like, hey, this is an interesting article. Here's the 2 or 3 things that you ought to take from this. So an example of like technology has enabled sharing, but it hasn't, if you don't really take the time to analyze it and communicate concisely like why an article is interesting or something, you haven't really helped anybody, right? All you've done is now told 10 other people, hey, go read the same thing that I just did. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's easier to access, but I find that people spend less time trying to distill it and share what's important as opposed to just sharing more information. And then it becomes kind of an overload. You can't access it all.
Great. How about over here? Question? Brooke, you got a question? Okay. Questions? No, not yet. I've got a question. Sure. Working overseas.
Mm-hmm.
How did that change you? How did that change your career, your outlook on your career? What was that experience like and how did that impact you?
So I've had a few, I've never been permanently stationed overseas, but I've had I've traveled quite a bit and I've had a couple of kind of extended assignments. For me personally, it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. It's an opportunity to kind of see a different culture. And not only kind of personally to get to experience those things, but professionally. So I've had a lot of work. I've worked a lot in Asia. We have an office in Singapore and then a couple offices in China. So very interesting to see just the culture of those places and how it translates into their work. It's very different. And as I'm talking about kind of being a good teammate, you have to change your approach when you go to a different culture because just the norms in that culture are going to be a little different. So a lot of times working with some of my colleagues in Asia, I have to be much more deliberate about asking for input. So in an American team setting, right, people are much more willing to just say what they think. Sometimes in Asian cultures, you have to think a little bit differently about how you're going to draw out ideas from people because they might be less willing in a large setting, especially if their boss is there to say something. So it's just a different approach. And that to me is what those assignments provide, is just that different perspective. So I would encourage any of you, if you have an opportunity to do something overseas, like definitely take it. It's a great experience.
All right.
First of all, thank you for the talk. This was great. When it comes to remote work and analyzing productivity, how have you seen a change and how do you address that and if there are issues with less productivity, how do you address that?
So I would say, just to give a little context for how kind of our corporation handled it. So prior to COVID, we didn't have any kind of remote work policy. We didn't have the tools. So we didn't have Zoom before COVID. We had Skype, and the video part of it didn't really work. Like we didn't use the video part of it. And so within 2 months after COVID, we all had Zoom and we were video chatting all the time. As we came out of COVID, kind of an interesting case study. The corporation originally was very adamant about everybody back to work right away. So in May of 2020, everybody come back to work. And very few people came back to work. And so I think they learned the problem was a little bit bigger than what they had anticipated. Our corporation, I think, has been pretty lenient on kind of slowly bringing people back and defining. They actually liberalized the policy quite a bit. And so now you can kind of work remotely, even if it means if you're in the Houston office, you can work from home a couple days a week if that fits your schedule, as long as it doesn't interfere with your work. What I've found and what the corporation's really done is left it up to individual supervisors. And I have not heard of a lot of problems with people kind of abusing that. Because I think what we've all found is it's great to work remotely occasionally and have those opportunities, but you really do miss something when you're not at work. So not having that personal interaction, and Zoom is great, but it's not perfect. It is not the same as sitting in a room with someone or a group of people and having that conversation. So I think for us, we've been kind of lucky. We haven't really had a lot of problems, I think, with people abusing it. So it's kind of self-corrected in that way.
Okay, we've come to the end of our time. Thank you all for coming. Please help me thank Flynn for giving up his time to come. So this concludes our Career Accelerator lecture series for the spring. We look forward to seeing you back in the fall. Grab some pizza on the way out, and have a great evening. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.